My name is Thomas Shepherd, for those of you who don't know me, and it's my pleasure to be the chairman of the Bath Preservation Trust. This is now actually my second year. It seems time flies when you're enjoying yourself, I think is the best way of looking at this. And so welcome to St Swithin's Church. Really grateful to this organisation for letting us have this building to use. It's part of the plan that I wanted us to move our AGMs around the city. Although we've got our own buildings, it's very, very interesting to engage with other buildings as well and just see them perhaps in the raw and have a meeting in them. And we've got other plans for future years as to where we might meet as well. So, but this one is a lovely church. I'm really glad to be here. I'm sure you all know it's the only 18th century parish church in the city, which is perhaps from our point of view a really important fact, and I think it represents a really lovely, lovely building. When I wrote to you with the notes of this meeting, I told you about the survey that we've done, because I suppose any incoming chairman wants to try and find out what's going on and what you all think about us and everything else. And it was very, very constructive, the process. Maybe it didn't give us any earth-shattering facts, but it did help us point in the right direction and picks up on themes that probably we know about, and if we had enough money in the world, we would be doing anyway. But it says, really, our museums are number one, and it doesn't surprise me in the slightest that our museums are number one. On the planning front, those who engage with us on the planning front really value what we do, but that may be individuals, that may be the council, that may be other people we work with, and I think that's an incredibly important part of what we do. Less was known about our charitable commitment to the countryside, the environs of Bath. And I hope that things like the park and ride, when we wave a flag, people understand that we're genuinely concerned about not just this lovely city, but the setting in which it sits. We know that we have got to always be rethinking what we should be doing and planning for the future, but we also recognise that the endless responses we make to planning applications and the bits of information we give to all sorts of people probably falls on very grateful ears for the people who want to hear it, and everybody else says, why don't you do something about it? Well, we probably are doing something about it, but maybe it's not the sexiest thing, not the thing that's going to hit the news, but we do a tremendous amount of work, and every now and again we do something which I'm really, really pleased we've been able to do, and other times we encourage development because, as with my predecessor, I believe that this city is a dynamic city. It's not Disneyland. It's something which we've got to keep alive, we've got to keep on responding to, and therefore we have to allow people to live in the city, and we have to work ways of making that happen without damaging the very thing that makes people want to come to Bath in the future. We need to get better, nonetheless, about shouting about ourselves. The survey really came back saying, you're a hidden secret, and a hidden secret really means we don't know what you're doing, and therefore we must try harder. We live in an age where things like websites are really, really important. Our website is a bit clunky, but websites are quite expensive, and if there's anybody in the audience who feels that sponsorship of a website would be a really great thing to do, then please don't feel in any way constrained to come and talk to me afterwards and talk about how you might be able to help us with that. Generally, we are blessed with sponsors. We are working well with local businesses and other organisations, and people do sponsor and allow us to put things on and make us do things which otherwise maybe we wouldn't have the funds to do. So I really am grateful for the sponsors that we have. When I was talking to Caroline and to Edward before I became chair, I had one thing that I really had a bit of a bee in my bonnet about, and I suppose being chair is a good thing to have a bee in your bonnet about. And the bee in my bonnet is the reason this is a wonderful city is because of the people who live and own the listed buildings. And for all the work that we may do, and all the work that the city may do, and all the work that anybody else may do, if people don't live in these listed buildings and care for them and love them and look after them, actually they're going to deteriorate and they're not going to be fit for purpose. And the wonderful city that you will have walked through to get here today is the result of so many people who have spent their own money on buying those houses and renovating them and restoring them and doing their very best. And I wanted to do two things. I wanted to give them the odd steer, sometimes that maybe there's something you could do a bit better than you've done, or you could do it in a different way, but also, really importantly, to say thank you. Because I think in life you can say thank you as many times as you'd like, and it's not enough. And we need to say thank you to the people who own our 5,000 listed buildings in this city, because if we don't, nobody else is. So we've got this wonderful book. Where is it?
Up at the back.
Up at the back.
There's a whole pile of them at the back.
And there's also one under my nose. This wonderful book here, which a number of people worked incredibly hard to pull together, and some great photographs. Please take a copy of this if you haven't got one already, and if you've got a friend who you think would really benefit from this. It's in really plain English. It explains really sensibly about paint and doors and door furniture and extensions and all the things that matter on a listed building. It's a really, really great book, and again, we were sponsored to do this. Please have a look at it. If you want to give it to somebody else, then do encourage them to become a member, because that's always a nice thing to do, and that will sort of pay towards the cost of doing it. But do have a look if you haven't seen it. It's a really great thing. And it's also our calling card. It's something where we can do something, rather than just saying encouragement. We can actually say, well, here you are, here's something we've done, this makes a difference. And we're circulating them primarily through estate agents. So estate agents are encouraged to give them to people when they're selling a listed building, that the buyer is given a copy of this book, which it seems to me a great thank you. And there's obviously a slight encouragement to become a member of the trust in that as well. But even if they don't, hopefully they'll carry on the good work. When I became involved as chair, inevitably, the nitty-gritty of the things that happen all the time that cause so much steam around the city start to bubble up. And I do look back and reflect that the sack of Bath, although the most terrible thing, actually was a very simple thing to rail against, because it was a bulldozer pushing down listed buildings. And now we have so many things popping up endlessly. Some really intractable problems like transport, which is an immense challenge to resolve. Cable cars, trams, student accommodation, building heights, you name it, we bump into it all the time. And it's sometimes easy to forget that we're actually just a voluntary organisation doing our very best to preserve the city we love. And Caroline will be talking to you a bit later on about all the things that we're currently involved in. But please do believe we do take a really active interest in these things, and our campaigning is an incredibly important part of why we exist and why we're here and why we need your support. But one of the things that we've also got to get our minds around is that membership organisations are different things for different generations. And I'm grateful you are all members. I'm a member. We're all members of this wonderful society, and we're very happy to be identified as such. But in my children's generation, you're a follower on Facebook or something. You know, why would you pay? You just follow and you like or you don't like, and you give your support in a different way. And we need to get our minds around how we engage with that younger audience, because they're the ones who are going to be worrying about these buildings in 50 years' time, and they're the ones that we need to motivate and encourage to do stuff. Now, any chairman wouldn't be worth his salt if he didn't thank his staff, and I'm lucky because I've got great staff, absolutely fantastic staff, and the road really hits the rubber when we find situations like a short decision to open at Christmas, and all the effort the staff made to get number one into really great shape, all the extra time that was put in, wonderful. I'm really, really grateful, because we try our best to be a good employer, but actually you need to have good staff to make things work. And one of the people who I know you will all agree with me is the best example that we have of just the all-round great person is Caroline. And can you give her a round of applause? Because she's normally totally unflappable. Because I see her more frequently than I used to. There are moments when she flaps, but actually they're very small flaps, and normally just to cool herself down before she goes and sorts somebody out. But we are so blessed to have her knowledge and her engagement, particularly around campaigning, to be able to speak eloquently and precisely about what we're trying to do. We have a real wonderful asset as an organisation, as we do in our volunteers. And I know many of you are volunteers. We have a great body of volunteers. And one of the great joys is the Christmas party, where I meet all these volunteers and realise just how many of them there are. One of the groups that sit within the volunteers are the trustees. And in the 21st century, being a trustee is a bit more than just a sort of worthy role. You can actually put yourself in peril. You can actually take risks, and it can be a real challenge. And therefore, I'm really grateful for my trustees. They do work incredibly hard. They all bring different skills. They all do different things. As you will have read from the report, We are losing some of our trustees for perfectly good reasons, which I'll mention a bit later on, but nonetheless, we still look for new trustees. So if there are people you think that will be really helpful, particularly on the campaigning side, particularly on transport, unsurprisingly, it would be really useful if we could find people who have got some real skills and the time to support us and help us. Because we're all transient and we need to have the next generation, the next trustees engaged and involved so that they can carry on the work to deal with whatever the next 50 years throw at us. And thinking about what the next 50 years throw at us, many of you will remember Michael Briggs. Michael was my first introduction to the Bath Preservation Trust. Over a particularly liquid lunch, he convinced me that it was a really good idea that I became a trustee some time ago. And he was a real pumping heart of this organisation some time ago. And I felt it was entirely proper, as I did last year, to go and see him before the AGM, just to talk through what we were doing. And he was well engaged. He had read, he's now pretty infirm, he's pretty immobile, but he'd read the report, he had some good questions. But the most important thing was he said, can you pass on my best wishes to everybody? I'd like to be remembered to everybody. I'm really pleased what good heart the trust appears to be in. So he was lifted by that, and that's absolutely fantastic. So we move on from generation to generation to generation, and we're just holding the fort at this particular moment in time, and we need to encourage the future. We need to make sure that future is going to preserve this wonderful city of ours. So it's been a real blessing being chair of this organisation, and that doesn't mean I'm about to leave, but it means I'm getting into my stride now. I'm starting to enjoy it. There'll come a point probably when people say, that's probably enough, you need to move on now, you're enjoying it too much. But at the moment, it's really a wonderful thing, and I'm really grateful that you give me the opportunity to chair it. Now, this evening falls into a number of parts. We have some formal business that we need to go through, which we will, and there are opportunities for you to ask us questions. When we've had that formal business, we will then hear from Caroline, who will give us a flavour of an update of what's going on, and that will be really helpful, the work of the Trust. We then have a talk from our guest, Ken Loach, and I'm really looking forward to that, and he will present that in his way. We're really very lucky to have Ken here today and talking perhaps on something that you might not expect to hear about in a preservation trust, but no bad thing. We are more than buildings in preserving this city. And then afterwards, as I said, whether or not there's a fire, there's an opportunity to go downstairs and have a glass of wine and have good conversation afterwards. So please do stay with us if you possibly can. So I'm just going to now pick up the agenda, and it says on here, number 1 was opening the meeting by me. Well, I've done that. I think I have opened the meeting. And the second thing that I wanted to pick up on was the minutes of the previous meeting, the minutes of the 74th AGM, which was at St Mary's, Bathwick last year, where we heard from Sir Peter Hendy on transport. The minutes have been circulated. Is it your wish that I sign those as a true record of that meeting, those of you who were there? And there's a voice that said no. A microphone, please. Oh, he said. I thought Jane could do with a bit of exercise, so. Thank you for saying aye, sir. I misheard you. So if you're all happy with that, may I have a proposer? Sir, you better be the proposer, as you said aye. Did we get that at the back? And a seconder from somebody who was there at the back. John Cullum. Thank you very much indeed. Report and accounts. There's a summarised version of our accounts in the report. The full sets are available for inspection anytime anybody wants to come and read them. And what I want to just pick up on as we are just considering these is the hard work of the finance team. We've reached the happy state now where, not that there was ever a problem with our finances, but now we definitely know that there isn't, because the finance team, Sue and Steve, have done a fantastic job, and the auditors were very complimentary about the state our books were in. So we're really, really grateful for all they do. But has anybody got any questions about the accounts? And if not, Is there an I in the room? Another, Adrian, thank you very much. Adrian Tinniswood, and a seconder, Barry Gilbertson. Thank you very much indeed. Having mentioned how pleased the auditors were, you might feel that therefore they have been a bit soft on us, but I don't think they have. We're quite a complex bundle of charities, and they've done a really good job, and I think it's really right that we should consider reappointing them. We have no recommendations that we shouldn't, but it's up to this meeting to say that you're so dissatisfied with them that we should find somebody else. May I have a proposer to reappoint the auditors? Tom Marshall, and a seconder, Barry Gilbertson. Thank you very much. Trustees. As I mentioned, we have 3 trustees who are standing down for very different reasons. The first, Simon Murray-Jones, many of you may know, architect who practices in the city but works very hard on lovely buildings all across the country. He has been an assiduous trustee. He's been here for a long time. We do have rules that mean that you can only be a trustee for so long, and by every twist and turn, we've come to the end of that period of time, and therefore, very, very sadly, he has to stand down. Probably there's a moment in the future where we can get him back, but he has very kindly agreed to stay on our Architecture and Planning Committee, where he's so valuable. But he has been a real boon to us. He really has a great grip. But equally, he was very much part of the whole project in 1 and 1A. Because he was a trustee, we had to get Charity Commission consent for him to be the overseeing architect, and he did a fantastic job and again served us very well with the wonderful results we now see. So we thank him for his tremendous input over the last few years, and we're really going to miss him. Another person we're going to miss is a gentleman who says because he's reached 75 he needs to stand down. I think it's a massively pathetic decision, but this is Bill Otley. Many of you will know Bill, a delight. Has run the finances with a pragmatic commercial approach, which is absolutely lovely and fantastic, and he's done a very good job for us, and he has a lovely sense of humour as well, and I'm really being grateful to him. He is remaining as a volunteer. Not sure if I told him this yet, but he is. And then the third trustee who's standing down, and this is very exceptional, because normally once you're a trustee, that's it. We take the keys away and you're not allowed to go, is Barry Gilbertson, who's over here on my right. Barry has only been with us a couple of years, I think, Barry, but has made a tremendous impact. His particular property development expertise, professional property development expertise, has been really, really helpful in a couple of quite sticky problems that we needed to sort out, and always a willing hand to help, as well as being a volunteer. And he has, to my delight, been appointed as chair of the World Heritage Steering Group for Bath and North East Somerset, which is a very prestigious role for him to hold. And he quite rightly felt that there might be the opportunity where we might be criticising that group, and therefore it would be wrong for him to be a trustee at the same time. We might see it the other way around, of knowing that we have a good friend in camp, and I'm sure you're going to continue to be a volunteer as well, Barry, which is fantastic. So he has been a really loyal servant to us. So we are looking for new trustees. I mean this most sincerely. And that doesn't mean that one of you has got to volunteer, but you might know somebody that we don't, who's moved to the city, retired to the city, who would be really, really, really helpful to us. We have got 4 museums, and we wanted to strengthen our offering in relation to museums. And in the papers that we've circulated, there is one trustee being put forward for appointment by this meeting, which is Sally Price. Sally is a professional museum education individual. That's what her background and expertise has been. She's been an advisor on the Museums and Education Committee for the last 2 years. She is willing to join us as a trustee, and I think will help bolster all the work that we're trying to do, both with museums and with education. And therefore, again, if I could put it to the meeting, if you are happy, I would like a proposer for her appointment, Adrian, and a seconder, Diane. Thank you very much indeed. So are you all happy with that appointment? Thank you very much indeed. Rather strangely, that seems to have brought it all to an end. So I talked to you for 15 minutes about my reflections, and then I've spoken to you for 4 minutes about all the formal business. And probably because you trust us all and you know that actually this is quite well managed, that's probably the right period of time to that, because what you really want to hear about is what we're up to. And I think this is the opportunity, therefore, for me to introduce Caroline, who's going to tell you a bit about what's going on. And you will happily take questions, won't you, Caroline? Well, you take questions, whether you're happily or not, you will take them. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you, Thomas, for your earlier tribute. No pressure then, all the stuff about eloquence. But anyway, this year is one where anniversaries are on our mind, I think, and there's a very obvious one with the 250th anniversary of the Royal Crescent. But I've got an anniversary on my mind, which was that 10 years ago I was appointed to this role. And so I've been reflecting a bit upon that. 2 days before my interview, this appeared in the Bath Chronicle. As you can see, it says, "I wouldn't trust the Bath Preservation Trust to preserve jam." So in thinking about this last year, I've been thinking, how do we fulfill against those criteria? Would this be written today? Maybe it would. And have we done anything to change that perception of the trust? Well, we don't preserve jam now, despite the fact that we do allow bees to make honey at Southcote Burial Ground, but it does give one some cause to reflect. But before I continue, I want to just pause in the way that Thomas did to talk about the staff. This picture shows some of the staff, not quite all of us, on an absolutely beautiful, absolutely perishing day in January when we took a day out of the office. We took a day out of the office while superfast broadband was being installed, so I'm grateful to the staff who stayed behind to see that through as well. But I'm the one who stands up here every year, but actually it's everything we do is a team effort, and that team is changing at the moment. Some long-standing members of staff are moving on this year. Victoria Barwell, who was curator of number 1 for a long time. I don't know what's happened there. Has the light disappeared? It's brighter, is it? Okay. I hope not too many pictures are too dark. Left the trust last month. She's decided she wants to do a bit less, in a bit less pressure, carry on being in touch with us, but to step down from her role as curator of number 1. Kate Rogers, who was our exhibition officer, left earlier this year to go on to much greater and better things at a museum in Bristol. Debbie James, curator at the Herschel for many a year, has given us notice of her retirement later in the year. And Sue Perrott, our head of finance, who has done the most marvellous job on the finances, as Sue said, is going off to do it for someone else. So let's hope we have the same report next year. It's not all loss. We also gain people, of course, and the substantive appointment so far this year has been Claire Dixon, who's somewhere at the back there, as our new BPT Museums Director. And she will have, with those vacancies apart from anything else, will be looking to refresh the museums team and take us forward into a new museum's future. And I'm delighted to have her aboard, not least because we stole her from the National Trust, the National Trust having stolen Tom Bowden from us. So I think we're quits now. As Thomas mentioned, we did the perception study last year, and as he said, the majority of our stakeholders think we do a reasonable job, and our museums are very good or excellent. We need to shout louder about what we do. We need to explain more about our funding, and we made a particular effort in this year's annual review to do that. But first of all, setting out where, in a pie chart, where the chunks of money come from. And secondly, there's a longer explanation in the financial section of how our finances actually work, so that people can understand that a bit better from just the raw numbers. There was, as it happens, no mention of jam in the perception study, but of course perception is one thing, and to some extent perception is reality, but we have to look at reality as well. So last year we responded to 253 planning applications. We influenced the outcome, and this is a piece of research that we haven't done before, but we reckon we influenced, and we hope influenced for the better, the outcome of 68% of listed building applications. And we influence the outcome of 51% of all planning applications that we comment on. That includes things like shop fronts and advertising and all the rest. You had to be wary of these statistics. What perfection would look like would be us not having to comment on any planning applications because they were so perfectly conceived that we wouldn't need to comment. And of course, it's partly to achieve that we've produced the Making Changes Guide that Thomas mentioned earlier, to give people advice before they get to the stage of planning applications when we then might have comments to make. But these aren't the only things we've been doing in order to communicate with people. This slide shows my colleague Amy Frost chairing the event that sold out first at the Bath Festival, which was a debate about the architectural future of the city. Peter Clegg, Andrew Grant and Piers Taylor were the speakers, and as you can see from the right-hand part of that picture, it was being live tweeted as the debate went on. So, as Thomas was mentioning, this is mass communication doing these sorts of things. It's a completely different ballgame from doing the other kind of thing we do, which is going around with small groups, working with small groups, with local initiatives. This was on Civic Day, where a self-volunteering group went around with our Conservation Officer Joanna Robinson to look at the Lansdowne Conservation Area with a view to helping her with us develop the Lansdowne Area Conservation Character Appraisal, which will feed into the local planning system. So we do all these various things, but as Thomas mentioned, things also keep popping up. The cable car gets ever more extraordinary in the images we see in the paper. The position the Trust took on this, which was that the first time round with the consultation, when everyone was asked to say whether they thought it was a good thing or a bad thing, without there being any visualizations, any business plan, or any clear idea of the route, we said, well, actually, you can't make up your mind on those sort of data. If any transport solution for the city deserves discussion, deserves debate, but then you have to look at the data and the evidence, and so we're waiting for that still, but this latest image is a bit of a surprise to have come in. The recreation ground, where are we with that? I feel I've been saying that for the last 10 years. I have been saying that for the last 10 years. A consultation process has begun with stakeholders. I think they just described it as active listening to what everyone thinks they should be doing. At the moment, they have a fantastic shopping list of everyone's desires, and the art will be for them and their consultants to distill this down in the first instance into an architect's brief. They haven't done what they did last time, which was appoint architects before they asked those questions. So they are doing it the right way round at the moment. The Mineral Hospital, well, this is a moving target. And we have, as I think some of you will know, applied for it to be registered as an asset of community value. That is an opportunity given to community organisations by the Localism Act 2011, and the opportunity allows you essentially to have the right to bid and to also buy a moratorium of time on a sale in order to do so. Now, I've made quite clear in public that the BPT is in no position to bid, even if it wished to, but what we hope to do is encourage those who are bidding to think about the community value and the community importance of that building, and to work with the community to find at least some evidence in whatever their plans are for the future that is not merely the exploitation of real estate in the middle of the city, but reflects and understands the long-standing history and importance of that site. The housing challenge continues on, and we will undoubtedly, the headline there says, "Need for new homes puts city heritage under threat." It's actually a headline from the Oxford Times, that, from last year, but it's one of the areas where it's useful for us to talk to other historic cities to find out what solutions they're coming up with, especially those like Bath, i.e. Oxford and places like that, where land values are prohibitively high, and so they make the demands for housing very pressured, especially for affordable housing. And then there are, of course, the meadows, Barthampton Meadows. Those who are assiduous watchers of the Chronicle website will know that all sorts of turbulent times are happening at Bath Council at the moment, and we wait eagerly to find out whether those changes at the cabinet level have implications for what is going to happen on Barthampton Meadows. And I believe we will be hearing something to that effect next week, but at the moment we don't know where we are. But this our role within the campaign about Barthampton Meadows has very explicitly been tied in, as Thomas said, to the part of our charitable remit which puts an emphasis on the enjoyment of the green countryside immediately surrounding the city, as well as on the city itself. So I mentioned the year of anniversaries, and this is, of course, the year of the Crescent. The foundation stone was laid on 19th of May, 1767, and we celebrated this with a mini reenactment, as well as some trades being there to show their craft of stonemasonry, joinery, and forging on the 21st of May, which was the nearest date we could pick to do that. But there are other events at number 1. We've got a fantastic exhibition on at the moment, Views of the Crescent, which I strongly recommend people go to see essentially how the Crescent hasn't changed much. There were some attempts to do amazing and wacky things there. There's one Victorian picture of huge fountains and parkification of the walk up to the Crescent. But essentially, this astonishing building is still there, so do go and have a look at that. And in particular, do come and join us on Saturday, the 29th of July, between 11 and 3, where we hope to be clearing the Crescent so that everyone can enjoy the spectacle of the Crescent without cars, and again with some theatrical engagement with the space itself. But we don't just do 250 years ago. We've cannily picked up another anniversary, which is the 50th anniversary just closing of Bath University. And we have an exhibition at the Museum of Bath Architecture about Peter and Alison Smithson, who designed some of the buildings at the university, but more particularly wrote a book before they designed those buildings called Walks Within the Walls, specifically about the city of Bath and how the 250-year-old architecture should be used to inform contemporary architecture as well. So that's a fascinating exhibition. It doesn't immediately spring to mind that there was an inspiration from the streets of Bath into the university buildings, but having that exposition set out is really interesting. And then at the Herschel Museum of Astronomy, another anniversary, which is William Herschel's 250th anniversary of Director and Music in Bath. So we're celebrating that appointment then. I should say, and it showed on the slide earlier, that the Heritage Lottery Fund has supported this series of exhibitions. And the Heritage Lottery Fund doesn't just give you money to have a nice time. It does expect you also, and we have expected of ourselves for many years now, not just to put on shows for paying visitors, but to do things for other communities around the city. So this shows a little, 2 pieces of work in clay by people who are part of the Gardeners Lodge group, which is a joint project with the Holborn that my colleague Polly Andrews runs, which supports people who are in need of support due to mental health or homelessness issues. And it's lovely having that group coming and making art inspired by our exhibitions, in this time from Rome to the Royal Crescent, our earlier exhibition this year. And then we also obviously work with children's groups as well. St Andrew's School have just devised some stories and performed them about the residents of the Royal Crescent. For those of you who don't know St Andrew's, it is 50 yards from the back of the Royal Crescent. It's very near the Royal Crescent. But you probably also don't know, if you don't know the school well, that half of the pupils are from an ethnic minority. The pupil premium, which is an indicator of need amongst pupils, goes to 1/3 of the pupils in the school. There are an awful lot of non-native first language English speakers at the school, and there's a higher than average educational need or disabled pupils. So even though it's just on our doorstep, it's a school that we're very proud to have an ongoing relationship with, because it's not a group of children that would necessarily feel an ownership of the Royal Crescent. And what we hope to be able to do, as we did with Twerton Infant School during the development of 1A, is to give them a sense of ownership of the bits of the city that we're also proud of. So, are we fit to preserve jam? Who knows? But I am sure that for the next 10 years we will be trying to preserve some things, trying to protect other things, and trying to have new ideas about the perennial challenges that the city faces. Or to put another way, we will be fighting battles, but I hope also we will be sowing seeds. So I'll leave it there. There's lots more we're doing. There's lots more you might want to ask about. I'll leave it for any questions. But as you'll see on this slide, I just wanted to emphasise that we will carry on sending you beautiful pieces of print in envelopes twice or 3 times a year. But we can engage with you much more if we also have your email and if you wish to engage in a dialogue with us, so that we can ask you questions about what you think about this or that or the other. We have a lot of members who let us do that, but by no means all. So if you ever think you don't know what we're up to, I'm afraid the easiest way to know what we're up to is to allow us to communicate with you by email. And we will be going out to ask all our members the ways in which they wish to communicate with us, partly because we've got to, with changes in the Data Protection Act, but partly, and most importantly, because we want to. So I'll pause there and hand over for any questions. Any? Robin.
Let me give you the microphone, Robin.
Thank you very much indeed. My name is Robin Kerr, and I hope I might be able to say that, and I'm not only a life member, but I may possibly be the person who's been a member of this the longest in the room. Anyway, no medals for that, anyway.
I'm sure
just
Thomas
shows I'm
Watson's
rather
birth,
old, that's all. But I had a couple of questions that I wanted to ask you. First of all, something deeply worrying has happened up on the ridge of the Chalcombe Valley, which so distresses me that I felt it ought to be raised here. And I don't understand how it is that we collectively, all of us, have allowed some houses, probably jolly nice houses, to be built such that they are now visible, and much more visible, on the Chalcombe Ridge there, where some of you may know it as Ensley, but actually it's not Ensley, it's part of Granville Road. How that can possibly have been allowed to have been built there, those to have been built there. We are all guilty.
Can I take that one first in that case? I entirely know what you're talking about, and anyone who walks that area or comes in along the A36 and looks across will suddenly see a row of houses where before there was the edge of the green slope. This did creep up on us slightly, but it's an issue that we have very actively taken up with the council, and in particular we've taken up with the council officers that one of their number said that it had no impact on the World Heritage Site setting, which is simply not the case. Since we've drawn that to their attention, they have said that they will take that much more into consideration in future applications. There are 2 applications precisely relevant to this point, live at the moment, and we're waiting to see what they decide to do about that, and that will be a good test. One of the things I would say, if anyone knows the landowner immediately below there is nothing in law to prevent the planting of a row of deciduous trees along that ridge in front of all those houses, and it would be a great boon if that were to happen. But it did slightly creep up, and I agree, and then it has also, as these things tend to be, become a sort of arms race of my house is bigger than your house as those new plots have been developed, and so it's also got worse. So we were aware of it, we're live to it. I strongly recommend, especially in your role as FOBRA, Robin, that you, as residents, mention that you mind about this to the planning team. Certainly Chalcombe Parish have been fantastically assiduous on making this point, and they are visually the most affected, even though the land developed is not in their parish.
Thank you very much indeed. That's very reassuring. Thank you, Caroline. I knew that you would have that answer. But the other thing is, as you mentioned, some of you may know I'm the chairman of the Federation of Bath Residents Associations, and we poll our members every 2 years to ask them what they want us to do, and without any doubt, for the last 11 years, which I've been associated with FOBRA, it's always transport. Now, some of you may not know, but it is a fact, a public fact, that the Trust is a member of an alliance for transport in the public realm in Bath, an alliance of a whole lot of stakeholders right across the spectrum, of which FOBRA is one and the Trust is another. And I'm very, very pleased that that is the case. I think the time has come. Caroline made reference to the turmoil that there is currently in the Council, and it's speculated that it is about transport, and no doubt we'll find out soon enough. But I think the best thing that we could all do is to put our shoulders to the wheel, perhaps through this alliance that I've just mentioned, to try to persuade the council to carry out its own policy, which is to implement the Bath Transport Strategy, which was passed by every single member of the council in November 2014, except for one who abstained. It's not much to ask, especially when we have Queen Square, where Georgian Bath started, is traffic mayhem. We have the glorious circus, which is one of the finest examples of Georgian architecture in Britain, if not in the world, and it's a roundabout. And even in Edinburgh, for example, they managed to eliminate traffic, or moving traffic, that is, or through traffic from Murray Place. Not as nice as the circus, in my view, but they managed it in Edinburgh, so if they can manage it in Edinburgh, we can manage it in Bath, surely.
I agree that transport is the biggest challenge we face. The Trust was set up in 1934 actually to oppose the Bath Bill, which involved knocking down a large number of streets in order to make the place fit for the motor car. I'm very pleased to say that it looks as if the demise of the petrol and diesel-driven internal combustion engine is going to die before the Georgian streets have died, and that will solve at least one of the problems that Bath faces of pollution. The issue that has been insurmountably challenging to date has been congestion, and I think all I would say is that we hope that we can work with the universities and with proper independent research to identify future-proof plans to deal with congestion, rather than just the endless supply and demand, accepting that there are going to be hundreds and thousands more cars.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, hello, Maggie Boswell, also a Life member. A friend of mine told me last night that the building that sprung up opposite the Theatre Royal is to be a casino. Is that confirmed, please?
Yes, it was always going to be a casino. Whatever individuals think about casinos, Bath Preservation Trust charitable remit doesn't extend to having views about casinos, though it did have views on the building itself. Now that it's going up, I have to say several people almost stop me in the street and ask me what I think of it. What I think is it shows off magnificently the buildings on either side of it, in that it couldn't be more plain, and they, in a sense, for Bath, could not be more decorated. And those buildings have benefited enormously from this extremely plain, extremely modernist styling building in between them.
Terry Corkin. I didn't plan to raise this evening. I was prompted to it by the Chair's introduction, where he talked about the importance of listed buildings, homes to people, and the work those people put into preserving these homes. I've lived in Bath for 35 years in a listed building, which I took on in very poor order. I've worked continuously, well, not continuously, but I've worked almost continuously for the whole of that time, and it is an ongoing project. I think it looks good from the outside, but it's certainly an ongoing project in much of the inside of that house. We need support from the council, and I'm thinking here of the fact that this year I was told that I had to have a wheelie bin outside my front door. I find that I have difficulty taking this seriously. It's a World Heritage City, and I'm told that I've got to keep a wheelie bin outside of my front door. There is nowhere else for it. The whole of our terrace, except those who have a flat bill, have had the same ultimatum. It just seems incredible to me.
I couldn't agree more. And we, when that policy was announced, we wrote immediately to say that you couldn't possibly treat, in particular, the historic seats in the city centre in the same way. Now, I know that some streets are being treated differently by the council in order to have these big gull-proof sacks, but by no means all in which wheelie bins would be a monstrous visual intrusion. And it's very, I often have to resist the temptation to look abroad, but you do see rubbish removal and cleansing of streets happening much more than once a week in other cities, and somehow other cities outside this country seem to manage it. But I agree with you entirely. We made the same representations. I would carry on making whatever representations you can to your councillor. I suspect this is a live and moving issue. Yeah.
Close. All right, sorry. Hello.
Here we go.
I'm Sam Priestman, and I'd like to add an idea for the east side of Bath, that there should be a bridge to connect the A46 with the A36 that would remove the traffic right out of Bath. And it could be very elegant when you think of bridges in Norway, and no doubt people better travel than I am. Is this all right? I'm sorry. Will know of other bridges, but it seems to me that it is much less destructive than a road on the ground that is going to upset all sorts of people. And I would like to hear what you feel about that, and everybody else in the room.
The A36-A46 link is another of those perennial problems, isn't it? And it looks so close on the map, and yet it's so far being able to make that link. The Trust, all I would say at this point is the Trust has historically opposed a link road for a number of reasons, not least the destruction to that valley that any of the roads that have previously been proposed would cause. The idea of a beautiful bridge is extremely tantalising, I think. We look at the Millau Bridge in France, a Norman Foster designed, 432 million euros that cost, just for the record. And I'm not sure we have a highways agency or central government that is capable of that sort of innovative commission, even if it were the right thing to do. I think we referred earlier with transport to primary research, and I think until we really understand who moves where for what reason in and around Bath, the risk would be to spend a very, very large amount of money and undoubtedly cause physical harm to the environment without actually solving the problem. I know that with Cleveland Bridge, although 20% of the traffic on Cleveland Bridge is through traffic of HGVs, that means that 80% of the traffic is relatively local journeys. And I think we have to recognise that we have to put a drive on everyone locally and in the periphery, having appropriate means to get out of their cars rather than just adding new roads. CPRE, they would, wouldn't they? But CPRE has just published a very good report which confirms what had been suspected, is if you build a road, you bring more cars to it. And so I think one has to be really sure of the problem you're trying to solve and then work out whether a link road is the right way of solving that, rather than saying a link road will solve all our problems until you've done that work.
Please hold it close.
Thank you very much. David Dunlop. Yesterday we went on a Preservation Trust trip to Milton Manor. So I think it would be appropriate when you're talking about your staff that we thank Peter Hall and Joy and all the others who do that. It's a great bonding experience, and several people here. We were all together yesterday. The point that I wish to draw your attention to is that when we came back on the coach at rush hour, there were miles and miles of queuing traffic from the Cold Ashton roundabout back towards Bath, miles of it. And we saw the same experience a week ago on another trip. Every morning you wake up to Radio Bristol and they'll tell you the slow journey times along London Road, but not just coming into Bath, going out of Bath at 8 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock. And those same people go on up the A46 and they're queuing at the Cold Ashton roundabout. It is a huge problem, and when you do your traffic study, it isn't just the centre of Bath, it isn't just the Circus and Queen Square.
No.
It's the whole area that needs a proper vision on how to deal with it. Using the railway and getting the railway properly electrified, so we reduce the diesel pollution that we're going to still get coming through Bath, is a top priority. We had
Chris Grayling telling us, oh, well, the people in Bath don't want all those dreadful pylons. I don't remember any of that. Did the Preservation Trust...
Chris Grayling was called out on that one by me as well as others, just to pick up that one first. It was a jolly good way of excusing the fact that the cost period is completely overspent for the electrification, and they've therefore had to kick large chunks of it into the longer grass. So, yeah, absolutely. Taking your points backwards, indeed you need a wider area study, and the fact that the Joint West of England transport vision is looking at most of the relevant area is important and useful. Of course, it doesn't include Wiltshire, and that's a lot of the east of Bath traffic, and I think that still remains as a problem. And then to your first point, many of you do know Peter Hall. She is neither going anywhere, she's neither staying or coming or leaving. She has been off sick for a while. Of course, she's done marvellous things for the membership, and I hope will continue to do so.
Albert Stepp. I was very worried about this whole tram idea. I moved only to this city just over 10 years ago from the north of England, from actually Sheffield, and we got a tram there. We had trams, and then they went, and then these new trams came in, and they thought they could put them in the roads. Then they found out that these modern trams are incredibly heavy, and so they couldn't put them in the roads. They had to empty all the roads, build bridges all the way where the roads were, and then put these trams on top. Now that was just a normal city. Now we have this beautiful city with all what's underground also. How do they even think about the tram? What damage is that going to do? What's underneath it? The buildings on the sides? I just think it's the best way to destroy the whole city if you do that.
There were trams, of course, in Bath. There were old trams in Bath, and there were lots and lots of overhead wires to deal with the old tram system in Bath. An individual has been promoting extremely effectively, I must say, the idea of trams in the city. He's an engineer by trade, and I think the council is now potentially looking at that. There are immense challenges, both visually and structurally, for trams in the city, and I'm sure if the council is commissioning the right sort of feasibility study, they will be nailing those points while they do so. If there is one more. Yeah, one more.
It's Paul Jackson, also a Life member. Caroline, two things, I suppose. When I go to Italy and I look at the streets in a lot of the Italian historic towns, I'm always struck at how tacky Bath streets are. I'm not talking about the buildings, I'm talking about the streets themselves, the pavements and the actual roads on which cars drive, etc. And I just wondered if, first of all, if that's something that the Trust is conscious of. I was outside the Theatre Royal the other night, and they've torn up some pennant stones there and put asphalt down instead. Now, hopefully that's a temporary thing, but I'm not sure whether it will be, because further down in St James's Street, where there's a cobbled strip across, separating the asphalt from one road and another, the same thing's happened, and it's been covered in asphalt. Well, part of it is asphalt. So that's one question. And the other question is, a lot of decisions in Bath Council are taken by councillors who don't live in Bath and come from North East Somerset. And I just wondered if there was any programme to outreach to the councillors and presumably council officers to just educate them about what's so special about Bath and why we need to take such care of our city.
Thank you. On the first one, the public realm, it is something in which we've taken a great interest, and occasionally we have little sort of rushes of blood to the head on Twitter about ghastly things one sees around the city, be it gull-pecked litter or two lots of entirely exactly the same traffic lights right outside Guildhall. That's the one that really mystifies me. Two traffic lights facing the same way, saying the same thing, about 4 feet apart. There are innumerable examples. There is a very good policy that is adopted by the council called the Public Realm and Movement Strategy. What is needed is for that to be systematically rolled out and controlled and enforced. And I'm sure that there is at least one councillor here, and I'm sure he will know that that's something that the heritage community in particular and the residents have really wanted to see implemented and taken forward. I mean, bits of tarmac that crop up, the real villain in that piece is quite often the utilities, and in particular the putting in of super fast broadband. You're allowed to do almost anything, even in historic cities. Conservation areas and World Heritage Sites are not specially protected, which is new for utilities. And when that act went through the House, that was something that we and others remonstrated about, but I'm afraid didn't win the argument. As far as cabinet members not being Bath residents, we do try at the beginning of any new council, after council elections, to offer the opportunity for councillors to come and hear a bit about the history of the trust, the history of the city, the history of the architecture of the city, and how that could inform what they do and what they come to. And some councillors are great and come along to those sorts of things, and others don't. Any in this room, by definition, are very good at coming along to those sorts of things. But I think it is a challenge to get the message through, and in particular when planning decisions are made, it is sometimes complicated when you recognise that decisions are being taken by people who perhaps don't fully appreciate the texture of this particular city. But we will do everything we can to help that.